All right, are you ready for this? So many of you requested this one, a deep dive into Joey Sapp's How to Find Hookers and Dope Everywhere You Go. And let me tell you, this book is, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's not your typical travel guide, that's for sure.
Yeah, no. It's definitely not what the title might lead you to believe.
Right.
Like-
Like at first glance, you might think, oh, this is some kind of seedy how-to manual. But it's really not.
Not even close. It's more like Sapp took a trip to the dark side of society.
The underbelly, yeah.
Yeah, and then he kind of wrote a satirical travelogue about the whole experience.
But here's the thing, the place he's visiting, this everywhere he talks about, it's not on any map.
Right, it's more of a concept.
Right.
Like, have you ever had that feeling when you're traveling and every city starts to feel the same?
Oh, absolutely. Like you're in a different city, but you're seeing the same chain stores, same brands, same kind of sanitized experiences, you know?
Exactly. You're not really anywhere. You're in everywhere, as Sapp puts it.
It's like this homogenized world we've created.
Yeah, and Sapp's argument is that this whole homogenized world, which is, obviously driven by profit above all else, it's a breeding ground.
For a certain kind of commodification.
Yeah, a commodification of vices, to be more precise.
He really dives into drugs, sex work, and gambling, and how they've been repackaged.
Like, almost like they're, being marketed to us in ways that are both fascinating and kind of unsettling, to be honest.
Oh, for sure.
So walk me through this. How is Sapp saying that these vices have become almost like products?
Like brands, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, take drugs, for example. Sapp argues that it's not just about selling anymore, it's about marketing with exoticism, you know?
So it's not just, here's some drugs.
No, they slap labels like Colombian cocaine or plant medicine, cannabis on their products, right?
Oh, wow.
They're turning them into luxury experiences almost.
So, like, making it sound more appealing.
They even use terms like artisanal or designer drugs.
Artisanal cocaine.
Yeah.
Does that mean it comes with a little, a label with the guy who made its name on it? Like, what does that even mean?
That's Sapp's point. He's highlighting the absurdity of how marketing can manipulate how we view things, even when it's something like illicit substances.
Oh, I see.
And it ties into something even bigger. The whole war on drugs, which, ironically, Sapp argues, becomes a part of the everywhere machine.
Because it's creating the system of crime and punishment.
Exactly. Yeah.
That ends up benefiting those in power.
It's a system that generates profit and control for certain people.
So the fight against vice actually fuels everywhere.
That's the paradox, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so drugs are definitely an over. What about sex work?
Sex work is interesting because you have this whole spectrum, right? You have those stereotypical seedy motels on one end, and then on the other, you have these slick websites advertising like elite companionship.
Oh, yeah, like trying to make it sound classy?
Yeah, exactly. Like high class.
Right.
The reality of sex work, though, is often masked by this veneer of, glamour and sophistication.
And Sapp brings up tourism, too, right?
Yeah, that's another layer he adds.
Like Amsterdam's red light district.
Places like that, they raise this ethical question.
Like, is it really right to package and sell sex work as cultural exploration or even, financial freedom for the workers?
That's what Sapp really wants us to think about.
Yeah, it makes you think.
Because are we really addressing the complex issues underneath? Or are we just trying to sanitize it, make it more palatable?
To make it okay for the everywhere consumer.
Exactly.
Wow. And then there's gambling.
Oh, yeah, gambling.
Which has become this global phenomenon now.
Not just Vegas anymore.
Right, definitely not.
It's fueled by all these sin taxes.
So the government makes money off of it?
Conveniently, yeah.
Yeah.
They profit from it while publicly condemning it.
And then you have people rationalizing it, saying they're supporting the hospitality industry.
Right. It all plays into that moral flexibility that defines everywhere.
It's like everything's kind of twisted around.
Yeah. It's a bit warped.
So how do you spot this everywhere underbelly? Does Sapp give us any kind of a roadmap?
He does, actually, yeah. He has this underground tourist's guide in the book.
Oh, really?
It's both hilarious and a little disturbing, honestly.
So what's in this guide?
He points to signs like cash-only economies.
Oh, yeah.
Late-night crowds, unmarked doors, the kind of things that hint at something else going on beneath the surface, right?
In the world.
And then there's this ask for Steve phenomenon.
Ask for Steve. Okay, now I'm intrigued. What's that all about?
It's this idea that sometimes all you need is the right name.
Like a code word?
Yeah. To unlock this hidden world of vice in everywhere.
Oh, that's kind of cool, but also a little creepy.
Right.
Like you're in the know, but also maybe in over your head.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, Sapp's not just playing tourist, right? He's getting at something bigger here.
He is, yeah. He's talking about the economics of desperation
Yeah.
that fuels so much of what we see in everywhere.
So on one hand, you have people who are just desperate to survive, turning to things like sex work or drug dealing because they have to. They have no other option.
Well, no necessity, yeah.
And they become vulnerable to exploitation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on the other hand, you have people who are desperate to escape.
Escape from something.
Their boredom, their stress, whatever it is.
They're looking for something.
And that fuels the consumption that keeps the whole everywhere machine going.
Right. It's like two sides of the same coin.
So it creates this vicious cycle.
And the people who really understand this, the ones at the center of it all, are...
The middlemen.
Yeah, the pimps, the cartels.
Yeah.
They understand that desperation is a commodity.
And that's how they make their money.
Sapp puts it really well. He says, misery is the most reliable commodity in everywhere.
Wow. That's a chilling thought. It's like the whole underbelly is built on desperation. The desperation of the people providing the services.
And the desperation of the people consuming them.
Yeah. But Sapp takes it a step further, right? He talks about how everywhere doesn't just commodify vice. It tries to rebrand it.
Into something virtuous, yeah.
Like self-care.
He critiques how indulgence has become this path to wellness, yeah.
And he talks about how there are all these expensive products and experiences that are touted as being essential for your well-being.
Essential, yeah. Like, you need this.
Like what? Those $10 green juices and those yoga retreats in Bali. Is that really self-care? Or is it just another way for everywhere to sell us something?
That's the question Sapp wants us to ask.
Yeah, it's making me think about all the things I've bought thinking it was for my well-being.
He's pointing out that often the genuine self-care practices get overlooked.
Like actually getting enough sleep.
Yeah, or spending time in nature.
Those things are free.
Right. They don't cost anything.
But they're not as glamorous.
And they don't make anyone rich.
Wow. So next time I'm tempted by some, must-have wellness product, I should really think twice.
Yeah, ask yourself, is this really for me?
Or am I just feeding into the everywhere machine?
Exactly. Sapp's encouraging us to be more critical.
More aware.
Of the messages we're constantly bombarded with.
Because in everywhere, even self-care can become a commodity.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about how everywhere packages and sells vice, but Sapp's book is not just like a boring expose.
No, not at all.
Right. He's not just, laying out the facts.
He's a satirist at heart.
Yeah, and his writing style is just as interesting as the stuff he's writing about.
Oh, absolutely.
So how would you describe his style?
He's got this way of taking these uncomfortable truths about society.
Like the things we don't want to talk about.
Yeah. And he blows them up to these almost comical proportions.
He takes it to the extreme.
Like he'll say, every city has become this sad parody of itself.
Okay, that's a little dramatic, don't you think?
It is, yeah. It's an exaggeration, obviously, but it highlights this feeling.
Like we're all living in the same place.
Yeah, that feeling of homogenization that so many of us feel.
Like when you're traveling and you walk out of your hotel, and it's the same Starbucks, same McDonald's, same Gap, no matter where you are in the world.
Right. It's like, wait, haven't I been here before?
Déjà vu.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's everywhere. And Sapp uses those kinds of observations, those little details.
Like he's really paying attention.
Along with this really vivid imagery to drive his points home.
Yeah, he's a good writer.
He's really talented. Like there's this one line where he's describing this alley. And he says it smells like regret and broken dreams.
Okay, well.
I know, right? It's so over the top.
But you can practically smell it, can't you?
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like he's painting this bleak, almost dystopian picture.
Kind of depressing.
But there's this dark humor to it.
You're laughing even though you know you shouldn't be.
Exactly. And he loves to use irony and paradox to point out the contradictions of everywhere.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Like he talks about the rehab industry.
Which is $1 billion industry, by the way.
And he points out that it often profits from addiction.
Instead of actually curing it.
It's like, wait a minute.
That doesn't make sense.
That's the point. It's a perfect example of how, in this system, virtue and vice get all tangled up.
Like they're feeding off each other.
Right, yeah. And he's also got these great one-liners that just cut right through the BS.
Like what?
One of my favorites is, hypocrisy is the only real currency in everywhere.
Wow.
It's like this paradoxical statement.
I think he's turning everything upside down.
But it really captures the messed up values of everywhere.
Yeah, like the things we pretend are important actually aren't.
And the things we look down on are actually what's driving everything.
It's like he's saying that everyone's full of it.
Yeah. And the way he writes it, you can just hear the sarcasm dripping from the page.
Like he's rolling his eyes as he writes.
Absolutely. Another technique he uses is juxtaposition.
Okay, remind me what that is.
It's when you put two contrasting things next to each other to highlight the absurdity of the situation.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Like when he compares corporate executives to street hustlers.
I remember reading that and thinking, what? That's crazy.
Right. It's like, how can you even compare those two?
But then I thought about it for a second and I was like, okay, maybe he has a point.
It's like they're both playing this game, right?
They're both hustling in their own way.
They're both trying to exploit the system for their own gain.
Yeah. It makes you question the categories we create in our minds.
Like, who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys?
In everywhere, those lines get really blurry.
Absolutely. Sapp also loves to use satirical lists and guides.
Oh, I love those.
Remember the Hall of Fame of society's biggest hypocrites?
Oh, that was brilliant.
He's just calling out all the BS in such a clever way.
But it's funny. You're laughing while you're learning.
Exactly. He's making you think and entertaining you at the same time.
That's a tough balance to strike.
It is, but he pulls it off.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to get absurd either.
Give me an example.
Like when he says that in some cities, the same guy will deliver your pizza, your hookers, and your dope.
Wait, seriously?
Okay, obviously he's exaggerating.
But I bet it's not too far off, right?
It makes you wonder.
It's like he's holding up this funhouse mirror to society.
You're seeing a distorted reflection, but it's still reflecting something real.
Yeah. And he does this thing where he's always talking directly to the reader.
Like he's letting you in on a secret.
Yeah, like we're all in on the joke.
But it also makes you feel kind of complicit.
Like, oh, I'm part of this too.
Because we are, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. That's what makes it so powerful. He's not preaching at us.
He's inviting us to take a look at ourselves.
And the world we've created.
And the way he does it, with this dark humor.
Yeah, it makes it bearable.
Like, it's heavy stuff, but you can still laugh.
It's like laughing at a funeral. It feels wrong, but you can't help yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've established that Sapp's a master satirist.
Yeah. But let's get into some of the specifics.
Okay.
He really goes in on the rehab industry, doesn't he?
No, he does not hold back.
Yeah. So what's his take?
He sees it as this predatory system that's more about making money than actually helping people.
And he's not afraid to call it out.
No, not at all. He talks about the high costs, the low success rates, and the focus on these luxury facilities.
That are more like resorts than treatment centers.
Right. And he talks about these predators of redemption.
Oh, wow.
Who prey on people when they're at their most vulnerable.
That's awful. But I bet it's true.
It's scary how true it is. Like these patient brokers.
Who get kickbacks for referring clients to certain facilities.
Exactly. Or those specialists who have no real credentials.
But they promise miracle cures.
Right. And then there's the whole insurance fraud thing.
Or rehab centers inflate costs and bill for treatments that people don't even need.
Just to make more money.
It's like they're taking advantage of people at their lowest point.
And that's exactly Sapp's point. He's highlighting the hypocrisy of this industry.
That claims to be about healing.
But is often driven by greed.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow.
And he makes this interesting connection between the rehab industry and other systems that are just as exploitative.
Like what?
The criminal justice system.
Okay.
Big Pharma.
Oh yeah, Big Pharma.
He points out that judges often sentence people to rehab
as an alternative to prison,
even if those rehab facilities aren't actually equipped to deal with the issues driving the addiction.
So it's not actually helping anyone.
And then you have the pharmaceutical companies who are making money from both sides.
From the addiction and the cure.
It's a crazy cycle.
It's like we're trapped.
Sapp's showing us this bleak reality.
But he's not saying all rehab is bad.
No, of course not. There are definitely good rehab centers out there and dedicated professionals who genuinely want to help people.
So what's his point then?
He's saying we need to be critical consumers.
Do our research.
Ask questions.
And not be afraid to challenge the system.
Because even recovery can become a commodity in everywhere.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked about rehab.
Yeah.
What about corporate culture?
Oh, he has a lot to say about that.
Where does that fit into the everywhere machine?
He basically says corporate life is just as morally ambiguous as anything else going on everywhere.
Like the street hustles he's talking about.
It's all about the hustle, maximizing profits no matter the cost.
He talks about this work hard, play hard mentality, right?
Which is really just self-exploitation.
You're working yourself to the bone.
And then you're supposed to go out and party to forget about it.
It's a never-ending cycle.
Overwork and burnout.
Yeah, and he's critical of how corporations use marketing and deception to sell us things.
Things we don't need, ideas that aren't true.
Like, this product will make you happy.
Or, this job will give your life meaning.
When it's all just a lie.
And he makes this really interesting comparison.
What's that?
Between how corporations exploit human resources.
Oh, yeah.
And how pimps exploit individuals.
It's all about seeing people as a means to an end, right?
Dehumanizing them, reducing them to their economic value.
He even talks about specific parts of the corporate world, like startups.
He critiques the whole startup scene.
Really? What does he say?
He says they're just repackaging old ideas and trying to make a quick buck.
Like they're not actually innovative.
And then there's Wall Street.
Okay, what about Wall Street?
He calls them out for selling bad ideas.
To people who should know better.
He compares it to organized crime with PowerPoint presentations.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt.
It's cutting, but it's also kind of true, isn't it?
Yeah, he's taking down these institutions that we're told to respect.
He's saying the game is rigged, whether you're hustling on the streets or in a fancy office.
So what's the solution?
It's not about escaping the system entirely. It's about recognizing the game that's being played.
And then what?
Finding ways to resist.
Okay, how do we do that?
Sapp talks about the importance of small acts of rebellion.
Like what?
Supporting ethical companies, speaking out against injustice.
Setting boundaries at work?
It's about taking back our power.
Yeah, I like that.
We have more power than we realize.
It's about remembering that we're human beings.
Not just cogs in the machine.
Okay, so we've talked about rehab, corporate culture.
What about politics?
Where do politicians fit into all of this?
Sapp doesn't hold back there either.
What does he say?
He calls politicians political pimps.
Wow.
Who profit from the very vices they condemn.
So they're hypocrites.
Big time. He accuses them of creating moral panics to distract the public.
While they're secretly engaging in the same behaviors they condemn?
He uses the war on drugs as a prime example.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's this decades-long campaign that has caused so much harm, but it's been very profitable for certain people.
And it's not just about drugs, right?
No. Sapp argues that politicians use moral grandstanding as a tactic.
To gain votes and stay in power?
You know how to push people's buttons.
Then he talks about lobbyists, right?
The people who work behind the scenes.
To influence laws and policies.
To make sure things benefit those in power.
It's like this whole other world we don't even see.
He describes it as a revolving door.
Where politicians retire from public office and then become lobbyists.
Manipulating the system they were once a part of.
And he criticizes corporations for using lobbying to influence legislation.
That puts profits ahead of people.
It's pretty bleak, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
But is he saying that all politicians are corrupt?
No, not necessarily. He's just pointing out the systemic problems.
So what can we do about it?
We need to be critical of those in power.
Hold them accountable.
We can't just sit back and accept the status quo.
We have to participate in the process.
Vote, contact our representatives, organize, advocate for change.
It's about reclaiming our power as citizens.
Exactly. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Sapp also talks about this idea of cultural appropriation.
How does that fit into everywhere?
He argues that cultural traditions are often exploited.
And commodified, turned into tourist attractions.
While ignoring the original meaning and context.
Like he uses Amsterdam's red light district as an example, right?
Yeah. It's marketed as this cultural landmark, which kind of sanitizes sex work.
It's like, come see these women in windows. It's part of our culture.
But they're ignoring the complex realities of the sex industry.
It's a very surface-level view.
And it's not just Amsterdam. He talks about Jamaica's ganja tours.
Oh, yeah, where tourists can experience Rastafarian culture.
But it's this carefully curated, sanitized version.
Completely removed from the real issues.
It's like they're selling this Instagrammable version of a culture that's been marginalized and criminalized.
So what's wrong with cultural tourism? It seems harmless enough.
Sapp argues that it erases the true context and significance of these practices.
Like it's disrespectful.
It's about turning something sacred into a product to be consumed.
With no regard for the people involved.
Everywhere. Take something real and twists it into a commodity.
Okay, and speaking of rebranding, Sapp has a whole chapter on this concept of rebranding sin as self-care.
This is where it gets really interesting.
He's talking about how we're told that indulgence is the path to wellness.
And how these expensive products and experiences are essential for our well-being.
It's like those $10 green juices and yoga retreats in Bali all over again.
Exactly. Sapp is saying this rebranding allows us to engage in excess without guilt.
Like we can have our cake and eat it too.
Binge eating becomes self-care. A shopping spree is retail therapy
We're all encouraged to treat ourselves.
as a way to cope with the stress of modern life.
But is it wrong to treat ourselves?
Of course not. But Sapp's point is that this constant messaging can distract us from the real work of self-care,
Like what?
taking care of our physical and emotional needs in a sustainable way.
So it's about being mindful.
Yeah, not just blindly buying into every trend.
We need to ask ourselves, is this really for me?
Or am I just feeding the everywhere machine?
Okay, so we've talked about rehab, corporations, politics, cultural appropriation, self-care. What else does Sapp cover?
He really dives into the drug trade.
Oh, wow.
He explores both the entrepreneurial spirit
Okay.
and the dark side of this illicit industry.
I'm sure there's a lot to unpack there.
There is. He talks about this thing he calls the DIY drug empire.
What's that?
It's where people with limited resources...
Wait, if they're not big-time kingpins.
No, they're just regular people who are figuring out how to create their own production and distribution networks.
So like small-scale operations.
Yeah. And he points to the low overhead, the high demand,
And the constant innovation.
as reasons why the drug trade continues to thrive.
Despite all the efforts to crack down on it.
It's like this ever-evolving game.
And he doesn't sugarcoat the dangers, right?
Yeah, he's very clear about the violence, the addiction, the exploitation that are often part of the equation.
Yeah, it's a serious issue.
He talks about these new, more potent drugs that have emerged,
Like fentanyl.
which have created even more challenges for law enforcement and public health.
There's like a constant battle.
And it's not just about the illegal drug trade. He also critiques big pharma.
What does he say about them?
He accuses them of profiting from both the problem and the solution.
That sounds familiar.
It's like the rehab industry all over again.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
He argues that big pharma pushes addictive drugs onto the market.
And then they make money selling treatments for those addictions. So we're being squeezed from both sides.
Illegal drugs on one hand, legal but potentially addictive drugs on the other.
And Big Pharma has so much power, right?
They lobby governments, fund research, market directly to consumers.
It feels like a David and Goliath situation.
It's a tough system to challenge. But Sapp's message is that we need to be aware
Informed consumers.
and make conscious choices about our health.
We can't just trust the system.
We have to advocate for ourselves. Now, I was surprised by something in this book.
What's that?
He has this whole chapter on finding meaning.
Finding meaning while the world burns.
Yeah. It seemed kind of optimistic given all the darkness he's exposed.
Yeah. Like, how can you even think about meaning when everything's so messed up?
But he acknowledges that it's a challenge.
To find meaning in a world that often feels meaningless?
He even points out that our search for meaning has become commodified.
Oh, interesting. How so?
He critiques things like mindfulness apps, wellness retreats, life coaches.
Like they're just another product to be sold.
He argues that they often offer superficial solutions.
That don't address the deeper issues.
It's like we're trying to buy our way to meaning and purpose.
But it doesn't work that way, does it?
So how do we find meaning in everywhere?
That's the big question.
Sapp suggests we have to step off the treadmill.
The treadmill of everywhere.
Yeah, like all the chasing and striving.
It's exhausting.
We have to reject the idea that our worth is tied to our possessions, our appearance, our achievements.
So it's about defining success on our own terms.
Exactly. It's about finding fulfillment in the simple things.
Our relationships, our communities, our creative pursuits.
And he reminds us that true meaning is never for sale.
You can't buy it.
You have to create it for yourself.
Through your choices and your actions.
He also talks about rock bottom as a potential turning point.
So hitting rock bottom can be a good thing.
He describes it as this place of both despair and opportunity.
Like you're forced to confront the consequences of your choices.
He talks about financial ruin, emotional bankruptcy.
Feeling completely lost and hopeless.
But he also sees it as a place where we can start to rebuild.
A fresh start.
He's not saying it's easy, but it's possible.
But he also warns about the industry of despair.
The people who prey on those at their lowest points.
Taking advantage of their vulnerability.
He critiques things like pay-to-prey programs.
Oh, wow.
Self-help scams, predatory recovery services.
It's like they're circling, waiting to pick off the weak.
It's disturbing.
Yeah.
But Sapp also emphasizes that rock bottom can be a catalyst for change.
So it's not the end?
No, it's a new beginning.
Yeah.
He talks about radical accountability,
Honing our mistakes, learning from them,
taking things one day at a time.
celebrating the small victories,
It's about remembering that we have the power to redefine success.
not letting everywhere tell us what success is.
We get to decide for ourselves.
That's a powerful message. So it's not about avoiding rock bottom, it's about how we respond to it.
Exactly. And Sapp says the beauty of rock bottom is that there's nowhere left to fall.
So every step from there is up.
It's a message of hope, of resilience.
Even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose a different path.
That's what he's trying to tell us.
You know, one of the most interesting parts of this book for me was when Sapp talked about the unspoken rules of everywhere.
Oh yeah, like the secret code of conduct.
It's like he's giving us the guidebook to this strange world.
He outlines the sort of social contract that governs everywhere,
The unwritten rules that everyone seems to understand.
even if they don't talk about them.
What are some of these rules?
One of the key ones is don't ask, don't tell.
Unless it's hilarious, right?
Yeah, it's like people in everywhere don't really care what you're doing
As long as you're not causing a scene,
or making things inconvenient for them.
it's like this surface level tolerance,
But underneath, there's this apathy.
this unwillingness to confront the truth.
And then there's the rule, cash is king, but Venmo works too.
So it's about anonymity.
Discretion, even as technology is making it harder to stay anonymous.
It's like we want to maintain this facade of respectability.
Even when we're engaging in shady stuff.
One of my favorite rules is blame society, not yourself.
Ah, yes. The classic blame game.
It's like we're all just victims of the system.
We're all just cogs in the machine.
It's a way to avoid responsibility.
To deflect blame,
And then there's the rule, everyone's a hypocrite.
which Sapp argues is the ultimate truth of everywhere.
It's like this moral flexibility.
These double standards.
People judge each other.
But they're doing the same things they condemn.
It's a world where appearances matter more than anything else.
And hypocrisy is not only tolerated, it's expected.
It's exhausting.
It is.
So these unspoken rules create a culture of cynicism and distrust, right?
Absolutely.
Where everyone's looking out for themselves.
And moral boundaries are constantly shifting.
It's like trying to walk on quicksand.
It's easy to get swept up in it.
To become numb to the hypocrisy.
A moral ambiguity.
So how do we resist? If everywhere has all these rules, how do we break free?
Well, that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. Sapp actually offers some strategies.
For navigating this crazy world,
He talks about small acts of resistance,
finding our people.
questioning everything.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
All right, we're back. And we're wrapping up our deep dive into how to find hookers and dope everywhere you go. And, we've explored a lot of ground here.
The commodified vices, the dark humor.
Yeah, the industries that are literally built on desperation.
Sapp doesn't pull any punches, that's for sure.
No, he doesn't. But I think the most challenging part of this book is how it makes you really look at yourself
Yeah, it's like he's holding up this mirror.
and saying, hey, are you part of the problem?
Because it's easy to read this and just point fingers.
Yeah, like, oh, those people are so messed up. But Sapp's really pushing us to go deeper, to
Right.
examine our own roles in this whole system.
So it's not enough to just understand everywhere. We have to figure out where we fit in.
That's the challenge he's laying down.
And he gives us these 3 roles we can play, right?
The cog, the beneficiary, and the resistor.
So let's break those down. Starting with the cog, what does that look like in everywhere?
I think the cog is someone who's just going through the motions.
Not really thinking about the bigger picture.
Yeah, they're not necessarily bad people.
But they're not exactly making waves either.
They're just playing by the rules, accepting the status quo.
Maybe even justifying it.
Like, that's just how the world works.
So like the person who hates their job
But they keep showing up every day.
because they need the paycheck.
Or someone who gets caught up in consumerism,
Always chasing the next thing.
but never really finding satisfaction.
They're not exploiting anyone directly.
But they're still fueling the machine.
It's like they're on autopilot.
And that's what Sapp calls learned helplessness.
We become so used to everywhere.
That we accept it as inevitable.
Okay, so we've got the cogs, the people keeping the machine running.
And then there are the beneficiaries.
These are the folks who are actually profiting from everywhere, right?
Yeah, the ones who are getting ahead.
So the corporate executives, the politicians.
Anyone who benefits from exploitation.
But it's not always that obvious, is it?
No, not always. Sometimes it's more subtle.
So it's not just the people at the top?
It could be someone who benefits from inherited wealth.
Okay, so they start the game with an advantage.
Or someone who works in an industry that thrives on exploitation.
Even if they're not the ones making the decisions.
They're still part of the system.
And they benefit from it.
And often they justify by saying, I'm just playing the game.
Or if I don't do it, someone else will.
It's that moral flexibility again.
It's like they've compartmentalized it.
So they don't have to think about the ethical implications.
Okay, so we've got the cogs and the beneficiaries.
That leaves us with the resistors.
Who are they in Sapp's world?
The resistors are the ones who are actively challenging the system.
They're not just going along for the ride.
They're trying to change things.
So we're talking about activists, whistleblowers.
People who are willing to put themselves on the line.
To expose the truth.
Yeah, but it's not always that dramatic.
So it doesn't have to be this big, heroic act.
It could be an artist who's creating work that challenges the status quo.
Or a writer who's speaking truth to power.
Or even just someone who's choosing to live by their values.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah, those everyday acts of rebellion.
Those small choices that chip away at the system.
That's resistance too.
But Sapp doesn't romanticize the resistors, does he?
No, he's very realistic about it.
It's not always glamorous.
It's messy, it's complicated.
It's not always clear-cut.
And sometimes you fail.
But you keep trying.
Because it's worth it.
So where do we fit into all of this? Are we stuck in one role? Or can we move between them?
That's the question Sapp wants us to ask ourselves.
It's like he's saying we're not defined by these labels.
We can be a cog in one area of our lives.
A beneficiary in another.
And maybe even a resistor in another.
It's about awareness, right?
Paying attention to how our choices are impacting the world around us.
Recognizing that we always have a choice.
We can choose to be complicit.
Or we can choose to resist.
It's not always easy.
But it's always possible.
And that's what makes this book so powerful.
It's not just entertainment. It's a call to action.
Sapp is urging us to wake up.
To see the world for what it is.
And to do something about it.
He doesn't leave us in despair, though, does he?
No, his final message is about empowerment.
He says, if everywhere is the machine, what kind of gear do you want to be?
It's a brilliant question.
It's like he's saying we're all part of this machine.
But we have the power to choose our role.
Do we want to be a small, insignificant cog?
Or do we want to be the gear that throws a wrench in the works?
The one that disrupts the system.
And pushes for change.
It's a powerful image.
It's a reminder that even in this crazy, messed up world,
we still have agency.
we can choose to be different.
Make different choices.
Create a different world.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into how to find hookers and dope everywhere you go. It's been a wild ride.
A lot to think about.
It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it.
It's a call to action.
A reminder that we're all part of everywhere.
But we don't have to be cogs in the machine.
We can choose to be something more.
Something better.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
We hope you found it thought-provoking.
And maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Until next time, keep questioning.
He's resisting.
And keep choosing a different path.